Hello, lovelies. Right, housekeeping. I have a new product out called Rack and Ruin, RAC and Ruin. There's some house rules there and some rules for playing goblins, racers, class in most old school games, but with a particular focus, I suppose, on old school essentials and rules cyclopedia. Up and coming next in that will be playing kobolds, racers class, and I shall be including both classic original flavour kobolds and new kobolds and even newer kobolds. So you will have a variety of options for kobolds. The idea is that you would play evil racers class, within a setting somewhere along the lines of 2000 AD's Feral and Foe. That's the idea, anyway. If other people can shamelessly rip stuff off, I don't see why I can't. Do you? I have the text, well, the prompts, the bullet points for 3 new reviews, which I hope to be able to put out. I was going to try and do it this morning, but for various reasons that's not going to happen. So look forward to those next week. Ronin, I'm back to working a little bit on that again. I just finished a section on how to run anthology type games. That is, kind of Monster of the Week, but with an overarching plot or the same characters or whatever going through it. So that was quite interesting. Also doing a bit of layout for the OGGM for another sort of catalogue product that he's done. I think he's found himself a nice little niche, sort of cataloguing different things for people. Broadly compatible with any D20 oriented games. I've also been fucking about with another AI program called Suno AI. I feel kind of bad for musicians because it is actually really good. The vocals are what lets it down. But for someone who has tried and failed to have a musical ear, it seems very useful. And also for anybody who needs copyright-free music, or music for their games, I think it's going to be very useful for people on that score. Mrs. Grimm has glandular fever, and I think I'm getting it too because my lymph node on my left hand side of my neck is beginning to swell and I feel a bit off. So just in time for when people were accusing me of being a hypochondriac, I seem to have gotten ill. So that may mean that you continue to get roll for insight for a bit longer than I was expecting. But I will try and get those reviews in before I feel too ill, and I will try to stick by my various streaming commitments. Alright, on to the comments. On GM or Player, Ace Up in a Sleeve says, is it just me, or are all RPG content creators Games Masters? Most RPG content is targeted at Games Masters too, and I wouldn't be surprised if the GMs were also overrepresented in viewers. I guess the GM seat is where you end up when you care most about the hobby. And also, despite what people say, when you have that entertainer blood in you, or you're a control freak and the only way you can handle your anxiety is by being in charge. That's also possible. Yeah, I think Games Masters tend to be the most invested, tend to have spent the most money, tend to spend the most time honing their craft, whereas player attitude is often, but not always, just, I turn up, I'm here to play, I'm here to be entertained, with less emphasis on the behaviour and craft and rules interfacing that the players do. That's probably to some degree wrong, given that there are roughly 6 times as many players as there are Games Masters, but this is the secret of monetization that Wizards of the Coast are chasing, isn't it? They need to monetize the players as well as the Games Masters, and then they could hypothetically sextuple their income. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I could do some player-oriented content, but then I'm mostly the games master, so it would all be from a games master's point of view, and I'm not sure how useful that would be. Let me know. On the Southport disinformation, Cryptid K says, anyone who has a problem with white British people standing up for themselves against a government that hates them is absolutely wretched. Stand up for yourself against those that hate you. Well, it's people like you that hate me, and so I'm standing up against people like you. On my own behalf, as a rational, empathetic human being who cares about other human beings, and on behalf of others. There are more British people than white British people. We were a mongrel race even before anyone with a slightly different hue came to our shores. So you're fighting to protect something that's never existed. So go stick your head in a pig. The cartographer says, another day, another reason to be ashamed of being British. I disagree with this idea of limited censorship, of stopping just this information because just this has caused harm. You said it yourself, these people who are rioting have been primed for this by years of misinformation from many sources drip-feeding them right-wing hatred. Should that not also be censored? Did that not also cause harm? Just because it caused no direct harm at the time doesn't mean it did not lead to this moment. It's the paradox of tolerance once more. Far-right voices were allowed to speak because it was fair, it was equitable, it was tolerant, even though they constantly called for the end to fairness, equity and tolerance. And now they're using that voice they were given to call for violence too, and now we should censor them. Just a touch too late, by my estimation. Now, we had a bit of a back and forth, but yet again, the full text of the paradox of tolerance is not being presented, because it says, mere speech should not be censored. And I agree. I think it has to rise to the level of calls for violence, or in this case, dangerous disinformation that could have led to someone being killed. So that, when there's demonstrable, provable, actual harm, that is when you step in. The problem we have is not that we need to censor these people, but the people need to make the arguments against them, rather than just resorting to deplatforming, banning, censorship, all of those tools. Now, I've been saying this for a long time, and things may have gotten to the point where a more repressive atmosphere is justified to one extent or another, but we got here because that was the first tool that people reached for. And it legitimizes these people's grievance when you do crack down on them that way, even though it may well end up becoming a necessity. So it may be too late, but we started with censorship, and we probably shouldn't have. And now most people are neither inclined nor capable of making the arguments that have beaten the far right throughout history. It's awfully lonely out here for people who try to do so, especially when you get criticised for platforming and so on. Night of the Night Lady, who seems to be making a lot of nasty comments lately, says, important rights and protections in the country where you'll be arrested for a terrorist documentary. So that's a reference to Tommy Ten Names' quote documentary, unquote, called Silenced, I think. So here's what actually happened with that. He repeated unfounded allegations and dangerous nonsense that he had said previously about, I believe it was a Syrian refugee in that one, fingering the wrong guy and telling his prone to violence followers that this was a bad person, they'd done all these terrible things which they hadn't done. There was a court order that he couldn't do that, and so that's why he basically engaged in violent libel, I guess you could call it. But then he had a big gathering recently, which probably helped fuel all this stuff that's happened since, though nobody knew that the Southport incident was going to happen. And breaking the injunction by the court, he screened his, quote, documentary, unquote, to that crowd, thereby breaking a court order. So that's why he's being pursued, ironically, because of a previous time when he pointed the finger at the wrong person, as he did sharing disinformation around this time, as did Farage, as did Andrew Tate. The Dead and the Damned says, Farage and the other MPs and high-profile grifters that spread disinformation to intentionally rile people up should face jail time for incitement to violence. That's not covered by freedom of speech. They knew exactly what they were doing when they either obfuscated or outright lied about the situation. Yes, they probably did, but could you prove it? You know, there's always, I'm just asking questions. And sometimes people are just asking questions. You know, that can be a genuine, meaningful thing to do. And yeah, they might have known that they were stirring people up, but how do you prove it? How do you demonstrate that in court? You know, this is another problem with social media. You have a collective atmosphere of people spreading and respreading and reinforcing dangerous nonsense, but no single individual can really be held to account, except maybe the person who posted it first. Yeah, it's tricky. Now, that's a slippery slope. I don't think it's good to go down. But we could have more aggressively dealt with the sharing of that disinformation, because it was known pretty much right away there was disinformation to anyone with a head on their shoulders. Salalem says, seeing as both Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage have condemned the riots, you took one of the Farage images from the video he did it in, and seeing as neither Tommy Robinson nor Nigel Farage have spread the fake news about this incident, does your implication that they did this by tying the image to this topic rise to the threshold of misinformation? I would say so. Well, no, because they did share the disinformation. And any crocodile tears, oh no, don't smash the place up, oh, that would be terrible, is thoroughly disingenuous, certainly on the part of Tommy Robinson, and almost certainly on the part of Nigel Farage. And Tate is just room temperature IQ, and not during the summer either. So no. On Beware the Broasar, Makedemart says, I played in the Camarilla LARP. It's what I thought of as one-to-one time. And yeah, it kind of is. From listening to many Jeffro Broasar interviews, the longest game they ran was under 6 months, had 6th grade humour and Muppets. Have fun, but I can't take them seriously. Yeah, I think their whole silly image does them harm. Other people make it more palatable and frankly more interesting than they do. It's always unfortunate when something cool gets tied to people who are bellends. In underserved genres, Matt Shaw says, I've never seen an RPG for tragedy either, the sad movie sort or the Shakespearean sort. I suppose because sadness would be a difficult emotion to invoke at the tabletop, and not exactly a desirable one for a lot of people. And Shakespearean tragedies require characters to act according to their flaws to their own detriment, which takes away a lot of agency that RPGs are about. I think it could be done, but it would be tricky. Fun has a lot of definitions. Some of them are broader than others. I think the amount of people that might be interested in a tragic RPG would be relatively small, just as I think those who would be interested in a sport RPG is potentially huge, but in any reality is likely very, very small. So that's kind of where you end up with it. Mechanics-wise, things like Wretched, they have mechanical ways of encouraging you to play up your character's flaws and problems and issues. And so does something like Savage Worlds, where you get bennies for playing up your flaws, but you can also choose not to, or at least that used to be the way. I should remember, I read the new version recently, but apparently no, my brain is not working well today. It's hot, anything over 30 degrees, and I suffer from Dave syndrome. Wraithing says, funnily enough, a discussion about pulp RPGs got me thinking the same. People frequently forget all the other pulp magazine genres, including sport and lots of hospital dramas. Considering how much detective fiction is sold and police procedural shows are on TV, it does seem odd that it's so hard to find a core cop RPG. I was going to say Keystone, but now that silent movie piano music is jangling around in my head. You'd think there'd be a vanilla version of Gumshoe, but even the Creative Commons version is full of examples from Pelgrane's other genre implementations. Bubble Gumshoe is the closest I can think of, but being a teen detective game, it's not going to offer more than basic help to anyone wanting to run The Shield, The Sweeney or Happy Valley. Mostly the cop genre tends to be a tacked on chapter or less in a core book or supplement of a generic RPG system. Yeah, that does seem to be the case. I want to get around to doing my criminal-oriented game called Diamond Geezers, which is obviously going to be based on sort of Guy Ritchie films and similar films of that ilk and other older ones like The Italian Job and so on. But the flip side of that would be a cop RPG, wouldn't it, I suppose? It might also be worth doing something with generic Gumshoe, building it out, perhaps. It might be an interesting thing to do. I shall ponder, but I have enough on my plate. Print and Play podcast says, sports may be underserved, but I'm not sure the average sports fan is looking for an RPG. Consider the following. How many people play essentially sports war games in their fantasy football leagues and so on, fantasy baseball and all the rest? Those are more stats junkies and things, but I think there is potentially an audience out there, albeit that the crossover between gamers and sports fans is pretty small. I think there are some commonalities, certainly in the more wargamey side, where people have a sense of competition in them, right? On unique settings, Hermes Alexandria says, how do you present weird settings to players? I find it hard to pass even settings like Dark Sun to players who aren't already fans. There is a steeper curve and a greater barrier to entry when it's something that's weird, because you have to absorb certain aspects of the setting before you can even play. I've had some success with preparing briefing sheets or having the characters be from insular locations and so on, or even, just flung into this world from somewhere. And then half the fun and half the effort, I guess, comes from learning about the world in-game as your characters, and that takes a lot of the pressure off. Once you've gotten past that initial hurdle, I think it becomes a lot easier. As a GM, though, it's perhaps even more work than usual, because you're having to make sure that you present the world properly and in a way that isn't just exposition and boring. So, yeah. On getting people fired as shitty activism, Humphreys Fox says, I 100% respect your discourse, though I definitely disagree on a few points. That being said, your thought is reasoned, civil, and often correct to a point. Part of the reason I dropped my DD membership is the way he treated you, even if I happen to agree with some of his points. I still haven't watched. Why bother? I get enough abuse in my comments section. Humphreys went on to say more, but I just want to take a moment to bring up this comment. They didn't unsubscribe from anybody on my say-so. I don't want you to unsubscribe from anybody on my say-so or because of anything they say or do about me. Even if it's one-sided, I like being on my moral high horse and having a position of superiority, and I'm quite sure a lot of people will drift their way back and may even feel quite silly if they re-listen to the video. On playtesting, Truffle says, this still sounds like you should be playtesting with Grimstreams as the solution. You would also have the recording of other people reacting and finding the rough patches, pointing you directly at the blind spots, making a note in the margin where you had to smooth over a spot, plus QA testers you already know and have played with. This doesn't mean free books for me. I've never been in Grimstreams. I'm in the wrong time zone for it. It just sounds like it addresses a lot of issues you raise. to an extent, but it also makes it work. And I have my project of playing everything at least once, right? So I need to be getting on with that. But perhaps once that's played out, maybe then I can start doing that. And finally, on the Kalergi plan, Kai Havertzout says, another immigrant killing people in England. You have those babies' blood on your hands. So, they weren't an immigrant. Nor were they Muslim, which was the other thing that was going around. They appear to be a mentally disturbed teenager. And that would appear to be that. So all of this violence, this rioting, all of this damage that you people have caused by spreading your racist nonsense, that's all on you, and there is no justification for it whatsoever. Not that there would have been, even if he were an immigrant, so fuck off. John Doe says, this mongrel, whatever genetic trash he's formed from, is telling you to ignore your own eyes. Collected anecdotes make data. No, collected data makes data. We're using a formal confirmatory process, trying to avoid bias and problems. That's what makes data. It's interesting trying to get around the various ways that YouTube censors racist trash like this. You put extraneous spaces, so mon, grel, and tur, ash, trying to fox the algorithms into not detecting their hostile tone. I wish they would stop characterizing these things as protests, because they're not protests. It's a spasm of annoyance by racist pricks who we should not be listening to at all, and whose grievances have little or no basis in reality. That's the actual case of things. And this endless parade of muppets that social media brings across my eyes, I mean, it's entertaining, but God is it wearing. Zang.
Oh, Rose is a dying of the consumption. Rose's house, the finest and only cat house in the town of Jezebel, is up for grabs. It's every girl for herself, and only one can earn the deed to the house, and Rose's stash of gold all to herself. A rootin', tootin', moochin' adversarial story game for 2+ players. No GM, pack of cards needed, poker chips or beads needed, and you can get it at post-mart.com, lulu.com, or drive through RPG.